start with Gen AI. It's never a better time to do that. It does seem to be another internet moment, and it's one of these things that doesn't come every year in life.
Hello and welcome to 11FS FinTech Insider Spotlight. I'm David Barton-Grimley, and in this show, we shine a spotlight on the best and brightest in the tech and financial services industry to get to know them, their businesses, and what they think the future of this industry will look like. And on today's Spotlight, I'm joined by Stathis Onasoglou, Senior Principal Architect at Google Cloud. How are you doing today, Stathis?
I'm very well, thank you.
Awesome.
Glad to see you again, David.
Yeah, you too, and welcome to our FinTech podcast studio dungeon, as we like
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
So there's so much happening right now in AI and cloud, not just the cutting edge of tech, but in terms of how it's landing in the real world. So today we're going to get into how Google Cloud is positioning itself in the middle of that transformation, what it means for businesses building with AI, and where this might all be heading. But first, before we do that, I'd love to get to know you a little bit more. I mean, tell us about your career and what led you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as many times it happens in life, my career has been a long chain of serendipitous events, which in retrospective and on aggregate could be misconstrued as a very well thought plan. I can assure you it was nothing of the sort. However, there was always three main themes, three main categories, which everything else was revolving around. And it's the same three things that I spend my time right now in my current role at Google Cloud as the financial services principal architect for EMEA. Number one, I always managed, to the extent that I was able to stay close and into the weeds many times, of AI or machine learning or pattern recognition or signal processing, depending on who you talk to and which community you're closer. I was privileged and fortunate enough 20 years ago to do academic research in very early systems of recommender systems, or what we used to call semantic databases back then. Number two, I'm fascinated by financial services as a technology that people invented and keep reinventing in terms of moving value across time and space, and then pooling risks, and then slicing and dicing them and redistributing them. Again, I was fortunate and privileged enough to work both on buy side, sell side, and from a risk advisory point of view, from a consulting point of view. And last, I always had a healthy tendency, or what I consider to be a healthy tendency, to understand more about the why and the so what.
Yeah. And that brings us quite nicely to the discussion that we're having today. And as you quite rightly said, through your career, AI is not new. It's nowhere near new. It's gone through all sorts of different iterations, as you outlined. But it seems that we're in this very interesting moment in time now over the last 18 months, 2 years, since generative AI has become a thing. And I'm curious to understand from your vantage point inside Google Cloud, like how would you describe this current moment? Like how different does it feel to the past?
It does feel quite different, and there's no doubt it's a pivotal moment right now, both on the business side and from the technology point of view. And maybe the easiest way to see what is happening now is to go back in time, maybe 2-3 years ago. There was a lot of work when it comes to R&D and technology, even before that, much longer before that. So 2017, for example, Google Labs came out with the publication of what was called the transformer architecture, which is a technology that is underpinning all the generative AI evolution, or most of it. Obviously, a few years later, the branding awareness and commercial big bang happened. Everyone pivoted to how we can use basically generative AI in the business and how we can derive value out of that. We spent a lot of the 2022 trying basically to understand where the boundaries of the problem and when the boundaries of the solution are. And we spent a big chunk also of 2023 trying to do that. We try to articulate basically the typical two-dimensional matrix in terms of where the low-hanging fruits are, what are the big bets, what generative AI can offer us, and so to speak, where is the ceiling and the cold floor where if we fail to do that, what happens, right? And all the degradations in between. So we've done that. And then 2024 was the year of execution. Yeah. And I remember I was talking in a financial services conference towards the end of 2023. And they asked me, what's your prediction about AI next year? And I never do predictions, but that was quite obvious to say that 2024 is the year where we start putting things in production and actually testing whether this is something useful or not. So we've done that, and now 2025 feels that it's a lot of aggregate experience, a lot of production cases, a lot of business cases. We've seen them going to production and people deriving value out of these cases, be it in the fintech world, especially in the fintech world, but also in the enterprise financial service space. And now it feels that it's a move more towards to bolder action, to bolder business cases that are more customer facing and are much more about the ecosystem and the social intelligence, or a society of intelligence rather than specific segregated tasks and siloed business cases.
That's interesting. So you're seeing customers in financial services really use generative AI to try to figure out how to stitch together knowledge and information. I mean, maybe just a follow-on question to what you were saying, like what would you say are some of those foundational use cases, or what you're seeing some of your clients use Google Cloud for when it comes to generative AI?
Yes, absolutely. This is a way to collectively segregate the cases that we see. Probably you can, there is a big basket of cases that are customer agents or customer facing agents. Then you have a big category of employee facing agents. And then you have coding agents, which is much more technical code generating or code automation tooling. On the first category, when it comes to customer-facing agents, we've seen recently from Starling, for instance, the digital bank in the UK, they've done some very, very good work in terms of make a huge change in terms of how we perceive and how we use PFM, personal financial management, essentially. If you think how PFM used to work until a few months ago or a few years ago, some product management team thought that some pie charts, some graphs, some index stats might be interesting for you, but you didn't control what you were interested in. And it was what someone else thought that might be interesting for you, right? What Starling is trying to do now with what they call money intelligence now is basically an overlay on top of their application. The consumer can go and ask how much I spent in XYZ in coffee, for example, the last month. And in real time, they will get the information that they want. Fantastic. So it's much more of a pivotal moment, much more hyper-personalized, and the first time that we can actually really see in practice how hyper-personalization works. That's one example on the customer experience or customer-facing agents. Then on the more operational efficiencies side and the internal employee-facing agents or Gen AI powered software, we see quite a lot of examples, and that was one of the first vector of use case that we've seen also coming to production from 2024. We had SEB in Sweden, for Sweden, for example, having a virtual agent to help their wealth advisors, and they measured actually the efficiency bump that they got out of it, and it was in the tune of 15%.
Wow.
We've seen work from Deutsche Bank with what they call DB Lumina, which is a virtual assistant based on Gemini, trying to accelerate sell-side research, essentially. What their analysts are doing helps them to generate the report, and then what they actually do is they have enough time to focus on building the conviction about their opinion, basically about their research and what their core business should be. Right. Similar case with Commerzbank for financial advisors. Similar work with quite a few other companies, either larger or smaller ones. Just to give you also one more example from the fintech world, we've done a lot of work with Saitora, the insurtech. And what they do is something very, very interesting. They are a B2B product. They build this unified single point of view for what they call the risk digitizing or the risk flow digitization, basically. And if you think how underwriting works or how claims work, you get a lot of disparate information. You might get information from APIs, you might get information from emails, from handwritten notes that someone wrote in their iPad. Especially if you think something like cybersecurity, you get all these very specialized questions with tick boxes and then notes and all these things. And what used to be happening is that we have underwriters, which are a very, very valuable resource, basically spending time in terms of collecting this information rather than building an opinion about where they want and can underwrite that risk, basically. So what they've done is they used generative AI to try to ingest, understand, and utilize all this information. And ultimately, they have a dashboard where all the information that an underwriter needs to have in front of them, it's there.
Amazing.
And then they focus their time basically just on the product side of things.
That's amazing. And I think if you look at financial services more broadly, there must be thousands of those workflows in the back office. Like writing a credit note, for example, trying to derive a credit score. I mean, there's so many different things where I think based on what you were saying, you can just see how collating knowledge and summarizing it just improves so much efficiencies. I think what you were beginning to talk about there was maybe moving on into the kind of maybe the next iteration of generative AI, which goes into agentic AI, right? Which is what everybody's talking about. It's kind of like the big buzzword where maybe instead of just collating the information, the agent is actually going and taking action and doing something within a sort of a predefined set of rules. How are you seeing banks and fintechs begin to make that move into that more kind of autonomous view of what it is?
Yes, that's the question of the day today.
Yeah.
And there are two interesting dynamics happening concurrently. There's the technology side of things, and it's worth spending a couple of minutes explaining what is an agent, basically. And an agent is nothing more than three things, basically. You still have a generative AI model. You have a large language model that offers that's the brains behind the operation, so to speak. Then you have a set of tooling, and that tooling can be your databases, can be your CRM systems, can be your Snowflake, it can be your ServiceNow, your incidents management systems, can be all these things. And you need that dimension because we spoke a long time about hallucinations and how models can be quite imaginative. Well, you don't want, no matter if you're a fintech or a large enterprise, you don't want that aspect, right? So you always, exactly. So you always want to, as we say, ground the answers of the model or the actions of the model to the reality. And that reality many times is your enterprise reality, because not all data are public. And the most valuable data is what your company has, basically. Yeah. So there is a set of tooling, the vector of these tools that the model can use. And then the big change between generative AI and what we call agentic today is the so-called reasoning loop. And there are different frameworks and different tactics to reason when it comes to the actual model and the actual framework. But simplistically speaking, if you think about the STAR framework that people are using, so situation, here's a situation, here's a task, here's an action that you will take, and that's the outcome, right? That's the response that you see from the system. And then if you go into cycles and you get the model to explain basically the situation, the task, the action that it got, and what was the result and how it judged the result, it will constantly improve itself, and it will give you transparency in terms of the actions that it did. So a little bit oversimplifying here, but an agent is basically an aggregation, of these three things. Now, what happens on the technology side of things, right? So on the technology side of things and what we do right now at Google Cloud, we've seen that there's a big risk when it comes only to Gen AI models to get a lot of siloed cases all over the place, be it in a fintech, be it in a big bank, be it in an asset manager. Everyone's trying something different. So what's the solution for that, right? Apart from the risk, also, you don't always want to have separate models doing one thing because you can't gain advantage of the collective information, collective intelligence of the company, right? So we do a lot of work in terms of agent-to-agent communication.
Right.
We developed the A2A framework, which stands for agent-to-agent. We open source that. We donate that to the Linux Foundation, so more people, more companies can contribute to that, and that enables a much more what we call society of intelligence or society of agents to work collaboratively together. Now, what is happening, or what I observe at least happening in our customer base and in the business world, is that people have started thinking beyond automation, beyond operational efficiencies at the point of its particular care, and they start thinking about ecosystems, which is something that is helped quite a lot about the society of agents and basically teams of intelligence. We had some conversations with a large bank, in particular with the operations teams in the bank for onboarding and KYC. And initially the conversations were about how to automate particular workflows, how to put some intelligence, how to offer the proverbial robotic arms to the people in operations so they can make their life easier, they can expedite, accelerate things. And someone from the senior leaders in from the bank told us, maybe we are solving yesterday's problem. How can we try to solve the problem more from an ecosystem point of view, or more from a system point of view? And if you start thinking in this way, this is where agentic AI, basically, agentic overflows can offer the best value.
Yeah. So what happens when agents work together? Then you get entirely new use cases that these things can solve.
Exactly. And to take that one step further, a little bit more accentuated in larger banks, in more traditional banking and finance, a little bit less in fintechs. Sometimes you have a combination of older systems, legacy systems, newer systems, something that was just put in production yesterday, for example. And then you have an amalgamation of mergers and acquisitions with disparate technology. You can't and you don't want to change these things in a big bank because it works. You move considerable amounts of money every day, and it's for all practical purposes, it's safe and it's well accepted by the consumer, right? What do you do with agentic? What agentic can offer you today basically is an intelligent API overlay, so to speak, which can to an extent cover or abstract these frictional points.
Top.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And allows you basically to do the same things while you keep changing stuff under the hood. So that's quite fundamental, and that's quite a pivotal moment also.
Yeah, and a big issue that banks face into all the time,
Absolutely.
right? This is one of the reasons why these transformation programs tend to fail so much. Is so if you get this layer on top, then it should just make it more straightforward.
Absolutely.
And tell me, where does Google Cloud sit within this ecosystem or within this stack? Because one of the things, listening to you speak and some of the research that I've done strikes me is that the whole way that software is assembled and distributed in some ways changes with agentic AI. Because to a certain extent, a company like Google, for example, via Gemini, you have that intelligence. I don't know what to call it, like a brain, for example. You said that your brain, an LLM acts a bit like a brain that can ingest some of this information and allow a bank to develop their own agents that do some of this work. So how do you see where Google Cloud sits and the kind of services that you provide to help businesses?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. And what's happening with generative AI and agentic AI right now is that you have myriads of offerings in the market, basically, and sometimes is quite difficult to spot what works best for you, basically, and how you assemble the value chain, essentially, that you need to use, right?
Yeah.
And that's quite a topical theme also for CIOs that we speak to these days, in the sense that a few years ago, you didn't actually need to understand all the levels up to the infrastructure in terms of getting something to production, getting value out of technology, and helping your business, basically. It's not anymore the case, and increasingly not more, because you do need to understand some of these details and some of this technology, and you need to go up to the networking level. So what we're trying to do at Google Cloud is basically to offer a vertically integrated but end-to-end AI platform, which offers a lot of degrees of optionality and freedom to switch between different technologies, and it's heavily based on open source. If you take the vertical integration, both in the business world and the technology world, we've seen that there's a lot of value having a vertical integrated solution. Simplistically speaking, if you sell wine and if you don't grow your own grapes, you might be offered to offer high quality at a fair price wine 1 year. What about next year?
Yeah.
What about the year after, right? If you can control the value chain, it's much easier to find cost efficiencies, to control the quality, and ultimately what we're trying to do with the vertical integration is to be at the Pareto optimality curve when it comes to performance and price. So the customer can choose basically whether they want the cutting edge model at a little bit higher price, or a model that it's much more convenient for everyday tasks, basically, and might come at a lower price point. So that's what vertical integration offers you. Then you have what we call Vertex AI, which is basically an end-to-end AI platform. You can connect with APIs if you have engineers and technical users with your databases, data lakes, very often with data residing on other clouds or on-premise, for example. You can call external APIs, and then you have all the tooling that you need in order to operationalize and productionize machine learning and AI. A/B testing, test the dynamics of the market, because with AI, big difference compared to other software is that it's statistical. So the dynamics in the market might change, right?
Yeah.
So you need to monitor all this stuff. The next layer is the models, which everyone is basically fascinated and is laser focused on models, but that's one layer of the whole platform, right? With the models, again, you have a lot of optionality. So you can get the Gemini models, which is the Google homegrown models, and with 2.5, it was one of the first really multimodal models, and it was quite a breakthrough. Consistently tops the ranks in leaderboards for LLMs, either in the first, second, third position, depends. So these dynamics keep changing.
Yeah, it depends, yeah.
If not every day, every other week. But you have also something that is called the model garden, which is basically a collection of third-party and open-source models. You can use Llama, you can use Anthropic, Claude, you can use DeepSeek, you can use other models and experiment with that, right? And the last layer that we've seen more and more coming into practice in the market is this idea of how you avoid siloed intelligence in your company, basically. And what we've noticed is that you need basically a dictionary, or you need a catalog of agents.
Yeah.
And we call that catalog agent space. It's basically a channel, distribution channel, to have your governance layer and to collect all your models that your company or your fintech is building, basically, and refer to them and make sure that everyone has visibility and transparency in terms of what the enterprise is building. So that's kind of the way that Google is approaching the generative AI or agentic.
I guess some of the same principles from before apply to today, right? The vertical integration, control over your own data. You know, your point as well about keeping track of all these agents and being able to orchestrate them and govern them. I think you're right. As banks start industrializing this, that is going to be absolutely critical, also to report to the regulator. And that kind of pivots a little bit into, you know, talking a bit about some of maybe the issues or how we might overcome those issues. And you know, some of the more topical things have been like scalability. You know, does it scale? How does it scale? How do you manage those hallucinations under, you know, when a bank has like millions or tens of millions of customers? And the other issue I think that's also quite topical is auditability. You know? And I know Google has been doing a lot of work to try and make these models as auditable as humanly possible, although I think there's a limit, you know, at the end of the day, to figure out like why a neuron fires to make a decision. I mean, I don't know why my neuron is firing to make a decision right now on what I'm saying. And in some cases, I think there's some parallels with how these synthetic systems actually work. But it'd be interesting to get your point of view on how we overcome some of those hurdles.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no difference between fintechs, like a neobank, for instance, or insurtech, or a payments or a PSP, or a large enterprise that exists for 150 years, right? So everyone is regulated by the same regulators, for example, and everyone has consumer duties, and everyone has to care about the same things when it comes to governance, adaptability, transparency, and things like sovereignty in some cases, right? When it comes to data. There are a few different threads here to unpack, and through a few different dimensions, but if I oversimplify a little bit and focus on the data initially, data is what underpins and undergirds basically good AI in general, not just generative AI, not just agents, but
that's right.
Everything, right? We've done some work with Erste, and that's public. You can refer to that online. Initially, they've been experimenting with research reports. They've been writing for years, basically. They're trying to fine-tune generative AI models that were tapping on this knowledge bank of research and analysis. And they've noticed that the model was giving them some dubious responses. And when they went back and looked at each one of the documents that they used to fine-tune the models, they realized that it was data that was not great and not the model. So that's rule number one. You have to curate your data, you have to keep your data, and then when you talk about regulations and transparency, you still have to think and worry about Things like DORA, digital operation resilience. Where is my data? Is
Yeah.
it in the country that I'm operating, for example? You have to think about access transparency. Who is accessing my data? Google Cloud as a whole, not just for AI, gives a lot of controls for all these things. So you can always tell, for example, who is accessing your data. If you ask for Google support to help you with a particular case, there's a full trail of auditability. Everything stays on the tape, so to speak, and you can
Amazing.
always refer back to that, right? You can always get strong assurance in terms of encryption. The customer can manage the keys, or even they can supply the encryption keys. You can use an external hardware machine, for example, to encrypt your keys if you want. There's an array of controls to assure of all these things, right? So that's the data side of things. Then when it comes to the model side of things, you have a few degrees of control there again, and a few degrees of transparency. If we're talking about more traditional machine learning, what we usually do is we try to attribute the model decisions to different features, as we say, to different dimensions, essentially.
Right.
To give you a simple example, if we are talking about anti-money laundering, for example, you can always attribute the decision of the model in terms of different dimensions like speed of movement in funds, right? So things like that. When it comes to generative AI, things get a little bit more complicated because, as you said, you can't double click in the 400 billion or whatever it is weights and see that this weight gave me this answer and all these things. But what you can do and what you should do is to try to ground the model to the data that you will instruct the model to look at.
Right.
So that's one dimension of controls that we have. So you can always say that the model will get answers from this body of knowledge. And the other control that we have is indexing, basically, and sources. So you can and you should ask the model to give you pointers to where it found the information that you asked for, right? So you can always go back and double click on a link, for instance, and have a human being in the loop, go back and verify that, yes, policy paragraph XYZ was saying this thing, and this is why we didn't allow that to happen, some kind of claim or underwriting or whatever it was in your business.
It comes back, I guess, as you're saying, to how you design the software. I mean, and I also just noticed this, and all of us use these models now in our kind of day-to-day lives. When you know how to prompt it well enough and tell it what to do and set it the guidelines, it is very good. When you don't do that, then it isn't. So in some ways, it's a little bit like a puppet. You still, the human still has to be able to put those guidelines and work with the technology. Yeah, it's just absolutely fascinating.
It's even if you think about Gen AI, it's still software, right? So all the software engineering principles still exist. We had one example of a large bank. They launched to production their chatbot, much better chatbot than the older days that you didn't have generative AI.
Those,
However, it's still software. So if you don't allow for capacity, for compute, for all these sometimes boring things like network and compute and security and all the array of considerations that you need to have in any software engineering or architectural problem, then you end up into trouble. And in that case, it happened in some occasions that the model was quite slow in responding to the customers, which consequently led to a drop in terms of NPS and satisfaction score with the customers and all these things, which is only natural, right? But it goes back to safe and sound engineering principles, and that's still there. It hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's not a universal panacea. It's still software that needs to be configured. I just wanted to end. I mean, this has been a fascinating discussion on maybe just, if you are a founder of a startup or fintech startup or even a bank, thinking about approaching agentic AI, what would one piece of advice be?
Start with Gen AI. It's never a better time to do that. It is
learn.
Learn. Yeah. It does seem to be another internet moment, and it's one of these things that doesn't come every year in life.
Agree.
But also be realistic. Be realistic in terms of what data you can capitalize on, what consumer segments you're tapping on. If you're B2B, if you're B2C. Be realistic, start small, and start piggybacking on other things that cloud providers like Google Cloud, for example, or the open source community has done, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yep. That's my advice for someone that's starting now. If you're also doing things with AI specifically, and you happen to use Google Cloud, go on cloud.google.com/startup-AI. We do have a program to help AI first startups. You can get $350,000 in Google Cloud credits, and you get also a little bit of help in terms of marketing or AI mentors and a few other elements of support with Google Cloud.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. And listen, everybody, it's coming to the end of the show. Stathis, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, David.
Tell us a little bit about more where we can find out everything you're doing.
Pop me an email if you want, stathiso@google.com, STATHISO@google.com, or you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stathis. Right, that's all we have time for this week. Make sure you follow 11FS on all the social media platforms to stay updated with everything we're doing. If you enjoyed the show, do subscribe to the 11FS YouTube channel, where you can also catch up on previous episodes. Have a great week, everyone.